The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of Oshkosh Media, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. I'm your host, Cheryl Hentz, and very happy to have you with us on this last show before Christmas is here, and it's also the last show that we'll be taping before the end of the year. So if I forget at the end, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and all that good stuff, and we'll see you back in 2017. But before we officially sign off, I'm happy to finish up our year of shows with our Oshkosh City Manager, Mark Rohloff. He's a frequent guest on the show, and we're very happy to have him here again tonight. Thanks.
Oh, happy to be here.
And we're taping on a night in between big snowstorms.
Just right? Freezing outside, that's all.
It's extremely cold outside, yeah. So since it is near the year end, everybody, as we're taping this on the 15th of December, everybody, or most everybody probably, got their property tax bills this last weekend. A nice little Merry Christmas card from the city.
Not exactly the greeting card everybody's looking for, but yeah,
we knew it was coming.
Yes.
We knew it was coming, and mine were up about $100 from last year, so not a huge difference and nothing terribly shocking. Actually, they were up a little bit more than that, but not too bad. So, have people called City Hall complaining about the property taxes?
Every year you're going to hear something from somebody. This is a higher increase than we've had in recent years, and that's something that we have to own. We've had some big reductions in our ambulance revenues, and we really had to come to grips with that. We were putting a number in that was just not getting supported over time. We have a large population that's on Medicare, a large population that's uninsured. 38% of our customers in the ambulance service are not insured. Now there's only about 8% of our population that's uninsured, but sometimes they use our ambulance service as a healthcare provider of last resort because they don't necessarily have a regular doctor. So we get a huge amount of people who are, it's politely called private pay, but it really means uninsured. And about 50%, a little over 50% are on Medicare. Only 12% of our customers in the ambulance service have regular insurance. So it changes a lot.
So these folks aren't just people who are on Badger Care or some other form of Medicaid. They simply have nothing.
They have nothing.
Wow.
52% are Medicare, Medicaid, and those costs. The state and feds, they haven't increased those reimbursements for years. I could triple the ambulance rates and it would have no impact on revenue. So it doesn't make sense to increase the rates when the only people who we're really going to get the money from are the people who are underinsured or private pay who have no insurance at all. So it really doesn't make sense to do it. So we've kept the rates pretty much the same.
So the people who have no insurance, and I know that you may not know all their particulars, but that's kind of interesting to me because everybody now is supposed to have some kind of insurance. Otherwise, they're paying penalties if they're filing income tax. And I suppose if you don't have enough income to file income tax, you maybe don't get the penalty then. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but do you know the demographics of these folks who are uninsured?
No, I don't, but I can tell you that even under the Affordable Care Act, it's not until 2018 that they're supposed to be getting, before they get penalized for that. So there's time that before it's going to hit a lot of people, and then of course things could change with the new Congress. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. But no, we really don't have a profile. Anecdotally, you can talk to our firefighters, and they can give you a pretty good flavor of that. But there are people who call because we're the only ones who will take care of them. Instead of calling a 7-digit number for their doctor, they call a 3-digit number, and that's 911.
Okay. Well, the property taxes, as you said, they did go up, at least from the city standpoint. I mean, mine went up 4.4% higher from last year. My city taxes went up 5.7%. And, of course, the school taxes, that was the other big jump. That went up 6.6%. And I'm sure that the referendum was hugely impacted by the referendum. What caused this 5.7% for the city?
Well, it wasn't on the expenditure side because our expenditures only went up 1.6%. We have what's also called expenditure restraint, another limitation that we're under, but because of revenues from the state that haven't increased in years, so every bit of the increase has to get absorbed by the only other resource we have, which is property taxes. The state continues to reduce the amount of money that we get from the state for non-taxable properties that are owned by the state. The university, the prison, the resource center, things like that. When I first got here in 2008, we were probably getting about 80 cents on the dollar if you valued the properties that are owned by the state. Now we're getting 38 cents on the dollar. So we've probably been reduced by about $1 million from the state just for that alone. That's half of our increase. That is 1/2 of our total increase.
Now, is that the same thing as what you call shared revenues?
No, this is different. This is called the
Okay.
Payment for Municipal Services Program, which says there are tax-exempt properties throughout the state, and those communities shouldn't be penalized because they have non-tax paying entities, so we'll reimburse them. Madison gets a huge number, obviously, for many reasons. But we're a pretty good-sized presence with public entities, but this number has been going down in recent years, and more communities are applying for it, and we're getting 38 cents on the dollar. They haven't increased the program in probably 15 years. So our percentage goes down, down, down.
Sure, and it has to be made up somewhere. And again, it's being made up. It's being made up on the backs of the taxpayer.
Yeah,
as is always the case with everything.
And the goal is to reduce property taxes, which we are in Wisconsin. We rely so heavily on property taxes. We should do something about it. But the state will say, well, no, we have to go give a tax cut here, a tax cut there. It's like, why don't you give a property tax cut to local people? And the shared revenue program is a big part of our revenue. That's about 16% of our revenue. But this payment for municipal services, if they just kept that up, and I always have to point out, because the chancellor points out, Mark, that doesn't come directly from us, and it doesn't. It comes from the state. It comes from Madison. The university didn't cut this. This was cut by folks in Madison.
Yeah, and so we're getting 16% shared revenue from the state?
That's 16% of our general fund is the shared revenue program, and that's really a redistribution of income and sales tax. That's the whole idea. There are many states where they give a community a full 1% of the sales tax. Wisconsin has a relatively low sales tax. It's only 5%. In other states, 1% would go to the cities. And then when the economy goes down, the revenue goes down. That's just the way it goes. The shared revenue did get cut a few years ago when the economy was down. The economy's been boosting back up. I haven't seen the sharing turn the other way.
Well, that's part of the problem, too. You know, so Madison continues to keep this money, and, you know, I guess to find out exactly what they're doing with it, we'd have to talk to Gordon Hentz or, you know, one of our other lawmakers or the governor himself, but it just doesn't seem fair. It's called shared revenue, and yet they're not really equitably sharing.
It sure isn't happening that I'm not seeing it.
No.
I made the mistake when I first moved to Wisconsin 24 years ago. I was the administrator in Berlin, and there's a Walmart on the edge of town, and I saw that, and I was like, oh, that's great, a good, stable revenue source. And then I found out that cities don't get sales taxes. In California, cities got a 1% sales tax.
Yeah.
That's pretty common in a lot of western states. And in other states, the community can set the sales tax rate up to a maximum, and a lot of them do that. We have no such authority at all, and there's no sharing of it. So the shared revenue program is intended to be that. And there's some value to that in theory, but when you don't implement it in practice, it makes it a little tougher.
Well, sure. And, you know, and my concern remains, how much more can we continue to absorb property taxes that continue to go up? You know, we have, even though there's a lot of younger families that have relocated to Oshkosh, we still have a lot of very old housing stock, and in a lot of those older homes, we have senior citizens, and they're on fixed incomes. And I mean, a lot of us are on a fixed income to one degree or another, unless we get a raise. But seniors, for sure, who are dependent just on Medicare or Social Security, they're, you know, or SSI, that would be another one, their income is fixed. And at what point can they just not afford to live in their homes anymore because taxes keep going up? You know, especially if they have their home paid already and they're just trying to pay the property taxes at the end of the year. You know, it's tough.
It's a classic debate in terms of, you know, what the proper mix of, because you think of somebody who's a senior citizen, the consumption is lower, and so some people think it should be a consumption type of tax, and then seniors wouldn't do that. It wouldn't be taxed as much because they don't consume as much, and that's just a natural way of things. But this property tax is so prevalent here, and it does scare away people, even though I can have a great conversation with somebody who from out of state who complains about our property taxes. Our sales tax is much lower. Vehicle registration fees are $75 for a vehicle. In other states, it's a property tax.
That's true.
30 years ago...
Personal property.
It is like a personal property tax.
Yeah.
30 years ago when I was in California, I had a Volkswagen Rabbit, and I paid $800.
Yeah.
And that was 30 years ago. I can't imagine what that same subcompact vehicle would be. And here it's $75. So we do have some things that offset that, but property taxes are something that just get people incensed, and they just don't see the connection between the taxes they're paying and the services they receive. It's all property value based, and that's not necessarily how our economy runs. We're not an agrarian society. Property taxes, we're all about agrarian societies. We're a service economy. We're a retail economy. It's a lot different. So, but there's debates pro and con. I could sit there and talk about it all night.
That's true. I did have one question though about the property tax bill. There's a line item here called first dollar credit. And then underneath that, of course, is the lottery and gaming credit, and I think most of us know what that is. But what is this first dollar credit? What does that even mean?
I wish I could tell you the whole thing, but it's a way that the state uses to write down the property taxes. I guess they don't trust us that we would reduce it, but when you hear about, well, the state reduced property taxes, they can use that as a way, but it's about $80. It's pretty uniform across the board for people, so it's regardless of the value of your property.
Well, the state gave me a whole extra $5.50 this year, so
There you go.
I guess I can thank Scott Walker for that $5.50. So, you know, along with property taxes, you guys always talk about budgets. You've kind of been talking about budgets since I think July or August, maybe. How does the budget look for the new year? Well,
the budget's only going up 1.6%. to maintain that, we've spun off a lot of different operations that are fee-based. So if it's funded by a fee, all of our building inspections are now out of the general fund because they're funded completely by the fees, so that somebody can look in and say, what are my tax dollars paying for? They're not paying for building permits. That's something that's paid by whatever the property owner is, business, residential, it doesn't matter. Another one has to do with special events. We've got a lot of special events. Our police and fire departments are really getting worn down. We've added funds in the police department so that the chief can have staff available to relieve people, because otherwise they're working literally 30, 35, 40 days straight during the dead of summer, and then during the winter we don't have enough staff to let them off even during the winter. So we want to make sure that we've got enough people to basically let these people take some time off. Sure. Because they're working some really crazy hours, particularly in the summer.
Yeah, in the summer, you know, we do have a lot of those special events, one of which is Sawdust Days. And I know that there's been some talk amongst council members and yourself and the police department about, you know, just what to do about them. The long and short of it is, what do you do with them? You know, it's when that thing first started back in the 70s, I was in high school, and it was a great thing to go to. And it seems like over the years it has grown so much. I think it's personally outgrown the park, and it's just become kind of a bad news situation, in my opinion, and that of some of the folks that I've talked to. So is it going to remain in Menominee Park, or where is that going, Mark?
The application has not been submitted to us yet, but we did meet with them, with the organizers, and expressed some concerns we had, particularly about public safety. And it was not a good situation at Sawdust Days this year. The chief referred to what occurred as a melee, and no one has really argued much about that. And it was directly due to Sawdust Days. The fireworks show had ended, and the police could see this brewing for all 5 days. There's not a lot of crowd control that's done, and I'm talking about passive crowd control, not active crowd control. The chief is proposing an increase in the number of officers because Sawdust Days doesn't want to make accommodations to make things easier, widening the aisles so that people can flow through the midway easier, putting the beer tent in a confined area rather than just letting people walk around. So then it would, they refer to it as a family-friendly event. Keeping the alcohol in a limited area would help. And it was proven very well. If you did go to that Wisconsin's Best Rib Fest event that was held back on Labor Day weekend, it was all contained. It was much better managed. There were no incidents. And I think that keeping that area under control, the Sawdust Days group does not want to make those changes. We've tried that in 1992, and therefore it won't work again. That's 24 years ago. You got to try to go at the time. We've suggested that you have wristbands so that people have a wristband in a confined area. Number one, it makes it easier to serve because you're not questioning, is this person of legal age? You just say, wristband good, there's, you know, you do those things.
Right.
They don't want to make those changes. And because of that, we have to respond. If you're not willing to do these things, we have to make sure that this is going to remain a safe event. So we're going to put more people on it. These things like widening the aisles, putting beer tents, those things, while they seem to be a nuisance, really get good results. And it's proven. You look at other events, but that midway is limited to the width of the sidewalk there.
Sure.
There's nothing wrong with
That's
going
not
to the
very
grass.
wide.
No, it's not wide at all. And when you get young people, the hormones are raging and they bump into each other, it just becomes a conflict situation. And that's really what the issue is. Now, to get back to your main question, I don't know what council's necessarily going to do with it. We've laid out for them that this is going to be a problem. And I know they're concerned about, they keep focusing on the fees. What you need to focus on is ways to avoid those fees, and the way you can avoid them is make these accommodations that make it safer, that you don't need a bunch of police officers. We had many police officers. Our fire department was serving as almost like a backup security because they knew the officers were in a very dangerous situation. We can't put our police officers at risk, so what's the police department going to do? They'll put more officers out there. Well, if we want it to be a family-friendly event, let's have it friendly before we make it friendly or family-friendly.
Right. And so, if you have to put more officers out there, Mark, are those costs passed on to the Sawdust Days people up front or afterwards? Or how, they're going to pay for those, right?
Yes, they are. Because of the concerns we have, we know it's a huge increase that we're proposing, and we're concerned that we may not get paid. So we have suggested that they are going to have to put a deposit down so that we have that money in advance so we know we're going to get paid. So these are the types of things that we're going to be presenting to the council when they consider it. The council may say this is over the top. They could very well deny the request as well. And with the frustrations that have been expressed, I wouldn't rule that out. It's just that council may feel that that's something that they have to do.
Well, and you know, I have a problem with Sawdust Days on a number of different levels. Of course, those are some of them. But then from an animal protection standpoint, you know, they bring in petting zoos. This year they tried to bring in other animals that weren't included on their application. And so that was stopped, I think a couple days or so before the event even started, because I kind of started raising some questions. And when the city looked at their application, they said, no, you haven't said you were going to have primates there. And so that was ixnayed. But, you know, even a petting zoo is animal exploitation. And there are just other things that can be done that don't include animals being exploited and exposed to sun and crowds and noise and all that. And then you have to wonder what it's doing to the animals at the zoo. You know, how are they being impacted by all this stuff? And I personally would like to see the thing not in Menominee Park at all. But the other part of this that I have a problem with the Sawdust Days Commission over is I wrote them letter after letter. I sent emails, zip as far as responses. And I think that that's really lousy on the part of that Sawdust Days committee. You know, they're utilizing a park that I help pay for through my property taxes. And they can't respond to a citizen. Shame on them. Shame on the Sawdust Days people. You know, I don't know who they think they are, that they don't have to respond to letters and so forth. But, you know, what has the city's experience been in dealing with them, other than that, no, they just keep saying, no, they're not going to do this and they're not going to do that?
We have a regular dialogue with them from the time they apply through the event. When things come up like the animals that were clearly not shown on their application, we brought it to their attention right away. They're very polite. Their lack of responsiveness, I'm not going to make any excuses for them. That's something that they have to account for themselves. I'm concerned that the group doesn't have the same level of support that makes it easier for them to be accommodating to inquiries like you had or concerns that we have. And that lack of dialogue, I think, has created more problems. And they have to ask themselves, can they sustain this? Because they're losing people on a regular basis. They have some cultural areas. The Mexican cultural area has switched with the person who runs that. The person who ran it previously, he wasn't from the area, but he was pretty responsive. A new person, there's not that connection. They may not know the rules, but there's no communication that's happening. And sometimes we'll say, well, they didn't know about that rule. Well, that's your responsibility as the organizer to tell that person that you've delegated this responsibility. Yeah. We don't know these people. They're brand new. You have to tell them. And, well, we just didn't do that. And there have been spills. There have been dumping of grease from the Midway food vendors, dumping grease down our storm sewer.
Oh.
And you know where the storm sewer goes.
Yep.
Everybody, storm sewers go directly to the lake. They do not go to the treatment plant. So they're literally pouring grease into Miller's Bay. And we said, well, they shouldn't have done that. Well, yes, we understand they shouldn't have done that, but what are you doing to prevent it? Well, we're going to tell them not to do it again. And it's like, well, if you don't know who did it, how do you know how to tell them? You got to enforce it more forcefully. You got to monitor it. And if you catch somebody, you kick them out. And, well, there's nothing we can do. And so that helplessness really says to me that they
don't want to do anything.
I don't know if
I'll
go
say
that
it
far.
for you.
That's
how I
I don't
feel.
know if they're capable of doing that anymore, to be responsive. And
But they
can't even respond to an email.
They don't even want to try. Right, they can't respond to emails, because I did send multiple ones. I just don't think that's my opinion and that's my attitude, and I don't think that they don't care enough to respond to people. You know, they don't want to make things safer. They don't want to take any of the suggestions that the city is bringing to them. They don't want to respond to citizens with very valid complaints or questions. I mean, I started out with simple questions and couldn't even get answers. And so I kind of lose respect for people like that. And I just feel like, hey, you don't want to do the right thing in a city park, then maybe the city shouldn't let you use the city park, because all of us have a right to know what's going on there. We all have a right to hear from these people, and we all have a right to state our opinions. And if they don't want to respond to anybody or work with anybody in a responsible, accountable manner, then maybe they just shouldn't be given the park, no matter how much money they want to pay. Of course, they don't even want to pay the increased fees. What is the deposit that the city's asking from them?
We're asking, because we are estimating the police costs to go from $25,000 to nearly $50,000. We want at least half of that down. And
so about 25 grand.
Yeah,
down.
and that's certainly impactful to them. To me, it would be better to make changes so that you didn't have to do that, but that stuff's not getting done. With that said, I want to make sure before we get out of this topic, I'm not sure how much more we're going to talk about it, but
not much.
The city's very committed to 4th of July celebrations. Yes. We have a great partner with Festival Foods for the fireworks show. That will continue regardless of whatever happens with Sawdust Days. We know that that's important. Festival's been a great partner with us, and they match the city's contribution. So, I mean, they contribute $12,500 of a $25,000 fireworks show, and they're very generous, and that's going to continue. And whatever happens to Sawdust Days, we'll make sure that there's some patriotic celebration going on the 4th of July.
Yeah, getting back to a good old-fashioned, now I'm sounding like an old-timer, but getting back to a good old-fashioned celebration of, what Independence Day is really all about, maybe a parade and a concert in the park or something like that, something that truly is family-friendly. And, then it could all be capped off with this fireworks display, which I think is wonderful. So that's my nickel's worth.
There you go.
Maybe it's a dime's worth even, but that's how I feel about it. So, as I mentioned earlier, we're taping this in between a couple of significant snowstorms, one that occurred last weekend and one that we're preparing for starting tomorrow. We've got to talk about the snow shoveling ordinances for sure, but how are the plows set? And for anyone who may be new to the community or not aware, how do the plows go about plowing the streets?
The first thing is we have to take a look at every snowfall event as developing a strategy on how to attack it, because when a snowfall starts and when it ends and when it peaks and what time of day it is. So we have to factor all those variables in there to how we're going to attack it. We have about 28 snowplow trucks. We have 28 snowplow trucks. So we have those out there on a pretty regular basis. We have 28 routes, and if there's a breakdown, we've got to move one of the snowplow trucks over there. So we have to kind of shift things around. But pretty much your neighborhood is plowed by the same driver every single time. That person knows the little quirks of your driveway, the little bumps in the road and things like that. And it makes it for a very effective way to to remove snow. Is 28 enough? Well, it's all we have. So when it's a heavy snowfall, we'll try to be preemptive and get out there and salt or put a brine on the street, which will keep the snow from icing up there.
Yep.
But again, it's all about timing, and it is not a perfect science. But every one of our snowplow trucks has a GPS device on it. And I know there are people who said they never plowed my street. We can look up and say, Ms. Hentz, they were on your street at 7:42 a.m.
Oh, sure, pick on me.
And they were going 50 miles an hour. They were going at 22.7 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. We have that level of detail. And it's not to just prove anybody wrong. It's more to document that we're safely doing it. Sure. And that we just double check and make sure, did you hit everything? Because sometimes, because our primary responsibilities are arterials and collectors. And arterials are the main drags, the Jacksons on the north side, Jackson, Bowen, Murdoch. On the south side, it's Oregon, Main Street, 9th. On the west side, it's West Haven, it's Witzel, and it's
Sawyer.
Everybody knows their streets.
Right.
Those are the ones we hit first. And then, again, depending on the time of day and the day of the week, our secondary roads pretty much are routes to schools. We got to make sure they're done. If it's a Saturday, not as important. Mm-hmm. On a Monday afternoon, it's extremely important. Sure. So those things all come into play. And so while we'd love to say, we'll be in front of your house, 3 hours after the snowfall starts, would be, number one, dishonest to you, but also it's not necessarily what we need. There are people who are at the beginning of routes and end of routes, and that happens. Mm-hmm. That somebody's got to be first and somebody's got to be last, sure. And that does impact. If the snowfall peaks at one time and we just plowed your street, and then it peaks after we've done your street, you're going to have more snow. The one that everybody complains about, me too, the snowplow comes by after I did my driveway, and then you got the apron to clear out, and I get all that. I have to remove snow from my driveway just like everybody else. But our drivers, they really know their routes, and they're out there, and we have 28 drivers, 28 routes. We, if they got to go home at some point, they have to rest, and they will work 12, 14-hour days, but we have to give them some time off. And so sometimes there will be a lull, and we take an educated guess based on all these variables to say what time we're going to send the guys home and what time we're going to call them back. And I'd like to say there's a great science to it and it's exact, sure. But tell me that meteorology is an exact science, and that's really the issue. But we go out and we get our 28 snowplow trucks out there and we go at her until we can't anymore. So
I know that one snowstorm last year that stuck in, I think, probably a lot of people's minds, and I don't know if it was the first one of the season or not, but it snowed pretty good. And I mean, it just seemed like, and I'm not saying this is the case, but it seemed to some people that they weren't plowing the streets at all. Like, I know someone who got stuck on Sawyer right at the corner where he would turn to go down his street. He got stuck right there. Well, fortunately, he could walk home, until his car could get unstuck. And, the plows were all busy, not just, the city plows, but other plows were busy, and people, the wreckers or whatever, trying to come and get you unstuck, they were all busy. And I heard of one story where an elderly couple had gotten stuck, and one had a medical condition. I don't know if it was diabetes or what it was, but of course, just scooting around, nobody plans to have a problem and take their medication with them. So when there's a big snowstorm, Mark, do they go out during the storm as well and start trying to clear streets, or do they wait until it's done?
We generally will go out and start hitting the arterials and collectors, depending on the day of the week, right away. When we get to the residential areas is when we've cleared those main arterials. If it's a real heavy snow, we might go back and hit the arterials before we a second time before we hit the streets, because the arterials are what get people there. Last year we were having a difficult time filling positions, so we had some vacancies. So we were bringing people over from other departments to help, but those are refuse drivers. But
sure,
garbage is number one, and then snow plowing. So once they're done with their refuse shift, then they would switch over. And we did, have some equipment breakdowns. Anytime there's an equipment breakdown, that poor route, and hopefully it's not your route, but
or yours.
Somebody's route gets hurt. And so when we do that, we suddenly say, all right, Route 12 has to get covered by 3 other people. So you'll take a little bit of it, I'll take a little bit of it, and another driver will take a third. So we have to move on the fly with those types of things. And I can't answer specifically, but generally those are the types of things that happen in the middle of the game where you got to make a game change. Fortunately, I will say, with our new public works garage, we are so much more able to get trucks in, fixed, and back on the street so much quicker.
That's good.
They go right in. I mean, if there's a bay ready, so if there's a problem, they pull right in, they get fixed, and they're back on the road so much faster. The turnaround time is phenomenal. So, yep, there will be complaints because there will be equipment breakdowns.
Sure.
But boy, we're going to get it back on the street as soon as possible.
So say we get this big 10-inch snowstorm that they're predicting for this weekend. Okay, I don't live on a major street. I live on a side street. So will my street, do you think, get plowed once or twice during a storm like that?
Oh, something like that. It's going to get hit twice. But
okay.
We're going to we'll hit the arterials first. Then we will. Then, depending on how the arterials look, we may go back to them, or we may hit the residential area. Then we're back to the arterials, and then depending on how much time's left in the shift, then we'll say, okay, do we make a decision to send everybody home and come back later, or one final push? And we still have 2 drivers that work like second shift that are just out there hitting spots just based on wherever the needs are.
Okay. And as far as snow shoveling, because it's not just plows that have to do things, we're supposed to, as residents, be out there clearing snow too. And you did send out in the most recent, I believe it was water bill,
Yeah.
And only property owners are going to get the water bills. So if you're a tenant, you may be responsible for your own shoveling. Your landlord might be, who knows. But can we just quickly run over, what the snow shoveling ordinance is and what people are required to do?
In a nutshell, you need to have your sidewalk cleared within 24 hours of a snow event. Now, we just had a snow event over the weekend, and just when I was done, then it started snowing again. So the clock kind of restarts. It's not, and we base it on whatever it says at Whitman Field. So if we have a weird snowstorm on the north side and Whitman doesn't get any snow, it may be a little different, but we keep track of it based on Whitman. But we do it based on complaints. We're not out there looking for these issues. So if somebody calls it in, we'll look. We will also look if we're next door neighbors and neither of us have done our snow, somebody calls it in for you and they see that my sidewalk has also not been done, they'll do both of ours. We don't send out notices because unfortunately we've experienced where people say, well, I wasn't home or I didn't get the notice. So it's 24 hours. Then if we get a complaint, we send somebody out to verify that the complaint's valid, and then we send a contractor out. So sometimes it's as much as 36. It may even be as long as 48 hours. So the 24 is the rule to start the clock starts, but it can be anywhere from 24 to 48 hours before we actually enforce it. Right. And we hope that we want people to clear the snow and everything.
Well, sure, and by doing that, it's safer for everybody, and they're preventing themselves, hopefully, from getting sued, too, if someone should slip and fall. So when you say 24 hours, is that from 24 hours from when the snow event ends?
Yes, from when it ends. So that means if it stops and then starts again, the clock starts over again. The 24 doesn't begin until that snowfall ends, and it happened over the weekend. So what are you going to say? Well, the first storm ended at this time. Yeah, but the second storm started like an hour later.
Yeah,
and
it
then,
wasn't very long.
So you gotta put all those things
Yeah,
in there.
a little common sense.
One more thing about snow.
Sure.
Look at the Public Works website. For anybody who's watching, we will let you subscribe to something that our street superintendent, Kevin Ewan, who knows a lot more about this than I do. I mean, everything I learn, Kevin tells me. Kevin will send you an email at the beginning of a storm and tell you what's going on, what we're doing, and then give you an update towards the end. He did it over the weekend. I subscribe to it, and it's a great service. Just go to the Public Works website. There's something there about snow removal, and you can subscribe to this. And so you'll get an email and fills you in on what we're up to.
Okay, excellent. So let's talk about rental inspections, because we're down to less than 20 minutes now already. I can't believe how fast...
We just have fun.
I know, I just can't believe how fast the time goes. So rental property inspections. Where did I put that other sheet now? Here.
It's on the back side of the snow.
Oh, yes, there we go.
We were made multiple uses in our utility bill.
That's a good thing. Residential rental inspections, new program starting in January 2017. So that's a few weeks away. And, just briefly tell us what this is and why it was started.
It was started as part of Council's discussion on our strategic plan about strengthening neighborhoods, improving the housing stock, recognizing that property owners have a significant investment. Single-family owners, probably one of their biggest investments in their life, if not the biggest investment, is their property, their home. And we want to make sure that those values are protected. At the same time, we have an obligation. Our primary function is health and safety, and we want to make sure that that extends into housing as well. And the council's made a decision that having a rental inspection program is something that will assist us in identifying code issues, and these are basic building code issues: electric, plumbing, smoke detectors, real basic things that are fundamental to health and safety. And the idea is that we will provide this service, but somebody has to pay for it. And it would be unfair to property taxpayers for them to subsidize a service that is really inspecting somebody's private, effectively a business. So the council made a decision that this program was going to get initiated, that we were going to start inspections. Unfortunately, along the way, the state legislature got involved. And what we had proposed was a targeted enforcement area, primarily around the central city and university, because that's the older housing and that's where most of our problems exist. We have some great housing. I live 2 blocks away from some wonderful housing on the west side. I have absolutely no problem with that housing. It's in good shape, but it said you must be uniform in your program, so we have to inspect every property. Even the ones that we aren't suspecting will find anything. But we're required to do that by the code, and we have to follow this law or we'll be in violation, and then our law gets thrown out. So we had to be very cautious about how we constructed this this ordinance. And the inspections will begin after the first of the year. We're doing it on a rotating basis. We've divided the city into 5 zones, 1 for each year. So you'll only be inspected every 5 years in a rental situation. And the first area is the central city right around the university. Well, that makes sense because that is our first area of concern. But eventually we'll uniformly over 5 years we'll get everybody. There's an inspection fee involved. It's $100 for the trip visit, $45 for each unit. So let's say you have a 10-unit building, that's 45 times 10, which is 450, plus 100 is 550. 550 for 10 units, that's $55 a unit spread over 5 years. It's not much. I mean,
it's really not. And, it's a cost of doing business. Therefore, it can come off the income taxes, and most landlords are probably going to build it into their rent. So, I don't know. I think that this is a good thing. And this is speaking as someone who has been a landlord and manages property. And I just think that it's a good thing, and it's probably long overdue. And if you're being a responsible landlord, then you don't have anything really to worry about. But I've talked to some people. I personally know someone whose property, their rental property, is so cold and the state law says you have to be able to stand in any room in the apartment, and in the middle of the room with a thermometer, it has to say 68 degrees. And if it doesn't say that, you're not following the law. And, you know, this person's place is so extremely cold. And I keep saying, you know, do something about this.
So I would ask that there's been a lot of misinformation, including things like we're going to pick your lock and some silly things like that. The program is intended for you to request the inspection, and that's when we'll do it. If you request it, we'll do it. So we're putting out some information to encourage people to call us, and we will do the inspection. And yes, your landlord will pay for it, but you have a right to safe, healthy property. And I know there are some landlords who will tell some horror stories, which are very true, about bad tenants. And I'm not disputing that. There are some bad tenants. You've been a landlord. You know what they're talking about. But our job is to make sure that it's safe and healthy. And if it's a problem that's caused by the landlord or by the tenant, well, then the landlord can hold that person accountable as well. I know there's a lot of laws out there that protect tenants, and I get that. But that's part of doing business. If I'm running a restaurant, I pay for an inspection to make sure it's a healthy place for you and I to eat. And we have to follow certain rules, and those rules are probably more stringent than you and I have to follow at home. There's no 10-second rule in restaurants, for example. I mean, but all kidding aside, we have to make sure that we preserve health and safety. And we have 14,000 rental units in the city, and that's, you know, half of our population. We have to make sure that that looking out for our interests in terms of making sure that properties are safe, and then the values are maintained. Because if somebody's next door to me is a rental and they're not taking care of it, drags my value down along with theirs. And how fair is that? Those are the things. And I respect the people who disagree with me on this. I wish I didn't have to inspect every residential property, but I believe that the state set it up to make good landlords human shields against bad landlords. That's not fair to the good landlords. But this thing about, well, renters have rights, yes, I believe they have rights too, to safe and healthy housing, and that's why council adopted this. I wish there was I wish we could pursue other alternatives. I wish we weren't so regulated by the state that we couldn't do something a little more common sense. But we're given the rule book, and we have to abide by the rule book that we're given.
Well, you know, in some ways, Mark, I think it does make sense. You know, it sort of evens the playing field. Nobody is getting special treatment then because of where their property is or anything like that. It's just across the board, all rental properties are going to be inspected. And so that's good to know, though, that because I do see it on here that, you know, you can call in and voluntarily schedule it, and it is for tenants. You know, so if a tenant calls in, has their place inspected, the landlord, of course, is going to pay for it, and then it would be inspected again 5 years from then?
Yeah, that would be the idea. It would just rotate.
And if there's some kind of problem, how long does the landlord get to resolve that problem?
Depending on the nature of it, but generally they'll be given about 30 days to correct it, and then we'll go back and inspect it. If it's okay, that's good, because if they got a permit, then we will have inspected it and make sure it's okay. So if they fix those things, we'll be in good shape. If they're not fixed, well, then we have to do another inspection, and there'll be another fee that's much higher, because now we have to make special trips out. When you got a 10-unit building, we can hit as many as possible in one visit. But if we got to keep coming back, the fee will go up every successive visit. Hopefully, they'll be real simple. If the smoke detector's out, just go get a new smoke detector, you're good to go. So,
although the tenant is not responsible for the smoke detector. You're not supposed to be removing batteries, but if a smoke detector is not working, that's the landlord's responsibility, and you're supposed to let them know, ideally in writing, to cover your own butt, and then the landlord is supposed to be taking care of it. But you know, if they're not going to take care of it, or they won't take care of it, you know, at least go and get it and be safe. And units are supposed to have COD. Every property is supposed, whether it's a unit that's rented or you live in it yourself, every home is supposed to have a smoke detector on every floor and a CO detector on every floor.
And those are good things to have. I mean, old furnaces, God knows what could happen.
Yep, that's exactly right. Now, I don't want to talk too much about this because I know you can't, but there's a lawsuit that's been filed about this inspection program because, what, the landlord association or the apartment association doesn't feel it's needed, or?
A claim has been filed. That is typically what leads to a lawsuit.
Okay.
The city has not rejected the claim yet. We're looking at what our options are and our strategies, which, I appreciate you, I can't talk about everything,
right.
but we certainly are looking at it, but we intend to implement the program on January 1. They could file a lawsuit after that if they so choose. But we feel we looked at that ordinance and the statute, and we followed it to the letter. Mm-hmm. I feel very comfortable that we have followed the law to the letter. This stuff about violating people's Fourth Amendment rights, if people are inviting us, they've said, we want you to come and look at our apartment, it's okay. Mm-hmm. We're not knocking down the door and all that nonsense that other people have written, and it's just that's really misleading and inaccurate.
Okay. And you're going to be forming a landlord-tenant advisory board, correct?
Yes. Thank you for asking, because the idea is to have about 7 members. We've only had 4 applicants so far. And now I know it's tough around the season, but if you're genuinely interested in serving on this board, it's really to help address these issues and how we can more commonly resolve them. So mm-hmm. Our website always has vacancies, applications, and fill it out. You can come to the city manager's office. Diane, my assistant, will give you an application. You can fill it out right there if you want, or do it online.
Okay. Couple of things people had asked me to ask you about. One is the status of the diversity coordinator position. This is something that was first brought up by Ben Stepanek a little over a year ago, and didn't happen because it was brought up so close to when you were going to be passing a budget. There really wasn't ample time to discuss it and do something with it. What's the status of it now?
The status of it is that the council, I prepared a report for the council studying the position and everything, and it was really interesting. We had a great workshop on it. I think it heightened a lot of people's awareness about why diversity and inclusion is important. It's not just about you need it because you have a large minority population. In fact, that's not the issue at all. The issue is more about how do we make ourselves more attractive and inclusive and welcoming. The council didn't take any action on creating the position. My recommendation was that we have needs that we need to address regarding diversity and inclusion that don't necessarily require a diversity coordinator, but we need to do something. Certainly, we need to take the lead on recruiting and affirmative action, and we comply with the law, but that's all. Mm-hmm. And that's not necessarily enough. Businesses are really fascinating in that I've had multiple businesses talk to me about the need for Oshkosh to be more welcoming. They view that as something as an attractor for them. They're seeking employees,
sure.
and because unemployment is so low right now, you're only going to get people from the outside. Well, if somebody is looking from the outside and they're minority and they don't see them being welcome, or they're in any diverse group, be it sexual orientation, race, language, whatever that difference mm-hmm. might be, if they don't see us as welcoming, they're not going to apply.
Sure.
And then the pool of applicants shrinks. And from a business standpoint, they want it to be as open as possible. So the businesses were really very persuasive to me that this is something we cannot sweep under the rug. We had, unfortunately, with our budget, I had proposed a human resources position to focus more on affirmative action and recruitment. Recruitment is an issue for us, even absent the diversity and inclusion issue, because we have so many people retiring, and we need to recruit people to fill these positions. And they're not all going to come from within the city. We need to bring more people in.
Sure.
And if people don't see us as an employer of choice because we're not welcoming or diverse, they're gonna move on to somebody else. Those are probably the reasons more than anything that we need to do it. There's an economic imperative here in this. Now there are a lot of moral imperatives, and some people people get a little edgy about that. But it's like, you know what? Take your disagreement over here for a second, because I need good people here working for the city of Oshkosh, and I need to recruit them and attract them to the city, and they need to feel welcomed. Citizen survey last year, over 50%, no, excuse me, yeah, over 50% of the survey said we need, that we don't do a very good job of being welcoming. That's something we got to look in the mirror and say, how can we improve on that? At the same time, 60% said they didn't support the diversity coordinator position, which is kind of weird. It's like, you say we need to be more welcoming and open to diversity, but they didn't want the position. Now that's very classic. I want to fix the problem, but I don't want to pay for it. So that's an issue we got to deal with. But I think we need to look at that. The other thing that council wants us to do, and again, recruiting for boards and commissions is tough, but revamp the Human Relations Commission to have these discussions. A friend of mine is a city manager, Woodbury, Minnesota. 3M is a huge presence in their residential community, and 3M recruits a lot of Asian Americans. Asian Americans weren't feeling welcome in their community. They formed a task force and really focused on that, and it's been improving the dialogue in the community, and 3M loves it because they're attracting people like never before.
Of course. This is a real quick thing. Somebody asked me to ask about, they have a parking permit, a pass or whatever that goes on their visor and then is displayed in their window to park on the street overnight. And they're asking, it's not always easy to remember to put your visor out so that they can see the permit. So they're asking if the city could possibly go with parking stickers that would go like on the windshield as opposed to this other, what they feel is kind of an antiquated way of doing things.
I had recently had to get a parking permit, so quite honestly, if you'd asked me about this 2 months ago, I wouldn't have really known the answer. The way the officers explain it to me is they can more quickly identify them when the visor's down and over. And there were a couple nights I had to go out. I was getting some work done on my house, so my garage was filled. And I had to put it out, and I had to go out and put it out there. That's the explained reason, but it's a good suggestion, and I'll tuck that one away.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. And some of these other questions I just don't have time for. A municipal court study, that's probably one that we could touch on real quickly.
Council decided that it just wasn't going to be financially feasible.
Okay.
We would have had to write about 30% more tickets, and that's not, the police department is not in the business of writing tickets, despite issues to the contrary. And we felt that there are things, dialogue with the courts about what we can do to make things go through there more easily, especially on code enforcement issues.
Okay, perfect. The other stuff, we're going to have to wait for another time. That always seems to be the case.
Oh, leave them wanting more, that's what I say.
There you go. Mark, thanks as always for being here, and I hope you have a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And the same to all of you. Thank you for being with us, not just tonight, but throughout this year, and we will see you in 2017. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.